You are now tuned in to the Rate Limited podcast with your host, Ray Fernando, Adam Larson, and Eric Provencher. Together, we have many years of experience in this industry, and we call ourselves AI practitioners because we sit down and play with these models day to day. There's a lot going on in the last couple of weeks, from Google to Anthropic and all kinds of buzz in the news. And you're going to sit down and hang out with us and make sure you enjoy the show. If you've been using these models, go ahead and drop any comments. We really appreciate the support with everyone giving us 5-star reviews all over the place. And make sure you share this along with a friend. So without further ado, Eric and Adam, go ahead and take us away.
Hey, thanks a lot for that intro, Ray. Yeah, it's been a busy 2 weeks, but a lot less busy than it has been in the past. So luckily, we only have a few new models to talk about this week. And I think we won't spend too much time on it, but I just want to go over what's been going on. So the first one that's been big is Google's new 3.1. It's interesting because I find a lot of people are just not that excited about new Gemini models. I think people are just not using them in their workflows as much. I think there's a little bit related to this in terms of how Google rolls them out, though. Like it seems like, you can use their CLI, which, has a little bit of maturing issues going on. And there's the anti-gravity, which has its own set of issues. But overall, like people are not able to use them everywhere they like. I think Cursor is the one place where people have had good experiences with it. In my personal use, I used it in the CLI and I had a lot of, 500 errors and disconnects, and it's just been a little messy. But I mean, I have been impressed with what it's done. I just haven't used it enough to get a good sense of it. But I want to hear from you, Adam. I know you were a big Gemini 3 bull in the past, and I want to hear what you're thinking on 3.1.
Yeah, actually, I've had very similar experiences to what you're detailing out on. Maybe back up a little bit here. When I first was reading about 3.1, I like that they're pushing for like larger context. I like, all the benchmarks and stuff look good. But at the end of the day, like it's, I would say, not stable enough for like prime time development. And I've actually was reading like a few posts online. A lot of people have just given up on it because of some of the issues they were running into. I don't know if you guys were getting it, but like internal error messages, things like that, that would actually trigger. I've actually gave up myself and just gone back to using the two models, Composer 1.5, which we'll talk about probably a little bit here, and Opus 4.6. I'm still very bullish on Gemini. I think they'll get this right, but I am a little bit worried that they're planning to deprecate Gemini 3.0 before 3.1 is stable, because I still use 3.0 to do like my plan analysis. So I'll generate a plan with Opus 4.6, and I use 3.0 to kind of give me that second opinion on the plan that I've been put together. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I'm curious, have you had Gemini 3.1 trying to do the plan? Like, assuming it's stable, I imagine it's like a net benefit in most cases. It should be able to do the same job.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it's stable, it's fine to do that. But I honestly can't tell that much of a difference in the bit I've been able to use it. I'd be curious. I mean, can you guys tell it's a step up from 3.0? I mean, it's hard to get the evaluation of it if we can't like use it for multiple days without it failing out on us.
Yeah, I mean, so I had my repo bench set up. I had done some tests initially with 3.0, and it was a model that did very poorly. Like it did a lot worse than 2.5 in the past. It did worse than Flash 3. It did worse even than Flash 2.5. So I was very disappointed with 3.0 when it came out. As a tool caller, it was a big step up, but I think it had a lot of issues where it would spin out as well. With 3.1, the benchmarks are a lot more positive there. So in terms of file editing and doing this work where it's able to kind of one-shot big changes, I think it's a lot more consistent. So that's a big step up for me. In terms of day-to-day use, I have to get back to it a little bit, but it seems to be a step up in terms of its graphic design capabilities. So I think it'll be interesting to play around with some more. I just hope they can manage to stabilize it a little bit and improve their CLI offering somewhat. And how about you, Ray? You got a lot of usage in Cursor, so I'm curious, have you spent much time with it?
Yeah, I try to use it inside of Droid, and I had the same issues. It just kept failing all the time, and the endpoint just, sometimes it would work. And then I was like, then I tried to use it in AI Studio, and it actually worked. I gave it like a really big architecture prompt for like making this multiplayer asteroid type of game that can do a bunch of cool stuff, and it's phenomenal at design. 0 to 1, I think that's its strength. Like they're literally just going from 0 to 1. Give it as much instructions and detail that you want, and I'm always very impressed at that first demo, or that first thing that it does.
Hmm.
After that, it seems to just really fall off the rails for fixing bugs. It makes its own decisions. It tries to steer itself. It tries to convince you that it's right. It's
Mm,
just probably the most annoying part of the model. And
it's
then when I
tricky.
transitioned into Cursor, it's the same thing. It's 0 to 1 is impressive, like super impressive. It's actually the harness in Cursor like makes the tool calling better than it does apparently in these other places. And the way it's able to spin off and do, when I see a sub agent spin off and then do some work and then come back, it's always very impressive what it continues to do, for the next steps and keep all those things in memory, which is probably the most impressive part. But once the game was running, to fix any bugs was just a nightmare.
Hmm.
And it wouldn't really fix them. And I spent a lot of time and a lot of prompting just to get it working, and it still didn't work.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing. Is I've been working in existing repos. I haven't done many 0 to 1 tests with Gemini 3.1. But like an example would be we have a fairly large repo. I mean, not massive, but I actually ran a work tree where I was doing 3.1 and I was doing one on Opus 4.6. Opus 4.6 just crushed it. 3.1, to your point, like it's just like painful to work. But I've been trying to give it the benefit of the doubt that it could be just stabilization things, like tuning that they need to do, things that they need to get right. So I've tried to not be overly critical on it. But at the end of the day, we got to get our work done. And right now, like, I just
Hmm.
don't feel like I'm able to get my work done. Maybe in a week or two, I'll go give it another try and spend like half a day kind of just using that model.
Yeah, fair. I mean, it's always tricky to judge a model by 0 to 1 because that's just not what most people do most of the time. I mean, it's very tempting to start a bunch of projects now with models, but I think a lot of people, especially doing work with them, they need to be able to use them day to day and in existing code bases, and it's a little trickier to kind of get a handle on that. So I mean, I guess we'll come back and see how this model how it evolves and once they stabilize things, how it feels to use. Curious to see, and I think Google has something good going on. And I'm very interesting to see how they evolve Flash as well. Flash has been a model that has been doing very well for a lot of people, and it's at a great price point. Um, but we've had a lot of other fast models come out recently. OpenAI just released the Spark model on their Pro plan that uses the Cerebres inference capacity. If you're not familiar with that, this very specialized hardware to run insanely fast workloads for inference on models. The issue is that it has very limited memory capacity, so you have to run only smaller models on there. You can't run the huge models that you normally run on the NVIDIA GPUs. So like you are getting a bit of a lesser model intelligence, but at those speeds, maybe there's use cases for it. So I'm curious, before I give my thoughts, I want to hear, Adam, have you played around with it at all?
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of Cerebras. I was paying their Cerebras code plan for quite a while. So like anything that they do or that they partner with folks, I'm always like on board because their speeds are insane.
Mm-hmm.
But that 128K context is just honestly killer for my day-to-day workload. I do think there's probably use cases for it, but it's hard for me personally to stay in that window of context. Typically, you've got some baseline of stuff that you need to seed in there, which is probably half of that already, 60 to 50 to maybe 70K context with just the context of your code base that you need to accomplish the thing you need to do, plus tooling, plus any MCPs. Just impractical for me to use this on a day-to-day basis. But really love Cerebras, huge fan of them. I'm hoping that they can do what they're doing now, but double that context window, and then we've got something magical there. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing, I've tested Cerebras a ton, and I've actually done videos on this in the past. Cerebras is interesting because they also there's a TPS, but there's also a queue time before they actually can start processing you. So you do have to just kind of be careful and not get overwhelmed with like the TPS claims and things like that. Because if you extrapolate it out from the time you send the response out, the results are actually lower than kind of advertised. And follow-up messages, the TPS will actually slow down pretty drastically.
Hmm.
But it is still a lightning fast model. So I don't want to degrade like what they're doing, but just don't get blown away by like the crazy TPS marketing things that go out around that.
Yeah. And how about you, Ray? Have you spent any time with Spark?
Yeah, I'd spent a lot of time at the very beginning trying to understand what requests I should be able to send to it, and then I think at that time Composer 1.5 also was out slash came out, and I just got so much more work done with Composer 1.5. The speed and the long bigger context window and it's weird because you can't use Composer 1.5 outside of Cursor, which is the whole thing, right? And the harness has made a lot of improvements, and I accidentally didn't realize I was even using Composer 1.5. I thought I was using Opus for a task, and I was like, oh, whoa, like this is because I would just launch stuff and come back to the window. I'm like, wait, it's done already, and so I would check the work, and I was like, well, this is the whole feature that I wanted to ship because I already had a plan set up, and that's kind of what I was trying to figure out. It's like once I have plans set up, can I delegate these different things? It's something that I want to go deeper on because I know that you have a product called Repo Prompt, Eric, and one of the things that I was impressed upon like many years ago is the fact that you can delegate, and you say that Opus is a good delegator to, or was it one of the models is a really good delegator model to other ones, and this is
Opus loves to delegate. Opus, its favorite job is, oh, I can give that to another model. That's amazing. Like it will do it constantly. I think Sonnet is even worse because Sonnet like second guesses its own intelligence even more than Opus does. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna trust the smarter model to deal with this.
So if I can get like a series of these models that are spinning up, like a Spark does something, and the
Yeah.
5.3 Codex, because I want to. I think the thing that I'm getting addicted to is sending off different threads of work to be done, and doesn't all need to be done at the same time. It's just like, hey, go research this, go figure this out, go put this together, do some things, and then get back to me. A lot of times, I want to do this, sometimes I'm just trying to spitball ideas. I'm like, what does this look like? And that's why I like these fast models. It's like, okay, I'll give me back something super fast, and then iterate.
The challenge with that is because I've done so many research projects on that, and I'm still struggling with this today. It's like getting the context right to pass to that subagent or subjob is so hard because then what the subagent ends up doing is going to find more context again, and then you kind of get there's got to be a solution. I'm sure there's a solution, but I haven't been able to really crack that perfectly in a systematic way, because what I found is in some cases I could save cost, because what I was doing is from a cost saving perspective. So like, could I actually make it cheaper by delegating simpler things to a simpler model? But sometimes it'd actually be more because we weren't passing context correctly. I didn't have that. The other thing I would share is, I don't know how relevant this is, but I like Composer 1.5 a lot just to ask questions about a code base. I asked the question here. It used 17 or 35.9K, 17.9% out of 200,000. I did the same question to Spark, and it used 64,000 and 50% of the context to answer that same question. Very simple question. So it's like, even, again, very tangential, but it is like, even something that I would imagine I should be able to have a couple conversations with, it's already half my context at that point. I can't use it as a daily coder, unfortunately.
So I wanted to touch on a little bit on the context window with Spark, because OpenAI's models are reasoners, right? And because they're reasoners, the advertised context window is a little bit misleading. So they officially say that, Codex and GPT-5, all those series models, those are 400K token windows. But when you use them in Codex or in Cursor, you're going to find that it's actually only about like 265, 270K tokens. And the reason for that is that there's an output budget that you have to allocate. So when the model's outputting tokens, that's part of the context window that gets fed in. And so you have to reserve an amount for that max output. And so that's something you have to keep in mind. Now, the thing with Spark is that its advertised window is 128. Now, I'm not sure if that includes the output or not. It's a little bit tricky to kind of reason about because it's not on the API. It's really only, in Codex. But it's something to think about because its reasoning trace is eating into the context window. And if you don't give it enough reasoning, it's actually going to make spurious tool calls that don't give it good information. So it's a model that needs to be smart enough to know what tool to call. But by thinking too much, it can overthink and then burn its context window on thinking. So it's like a tricky balance to kind of find. And I find we're not quite there yet with a small reasoning model to kind of get there. What is interesting is that Composer is also a reasoning model, but it's kind of trained to lean very heavily on a lot of the semantic search and token efficient searching that Cursor provides. So it's able to kind of make its way out of that problem a little bit better. I know they spend a lot of time iterating specifically on their harness, and Spark is a brand new experiment. It's not fair to compare them quite yet, but I think it's interesting to see, where we land on this. And I think the model of being used as a subagent. I think Spark might be a good place for that. It's just you have to watch out, because if you give it too complicated of workflow, I find that it gets lost and loses track of what it's been doing. And deeper in the context window, it's a lot less intelligent. Like, all models struggle from this. Like, the more context they're consuming, the more tool calls they invoke, the less intelligent they are, the less on track they are with what you asked. There's no escaping it. So newer, bigger models do a lot better now with staying coherent deeper into the context window, but it's still an issue. And it's just even more so with smaller models by a large margin. So something to keep in mind as you're trying these models. And I think the naming is maybe a little bit misleading on a model like Codex 5.3 Spark. You're like, oh, it's just a faster 5.3, but it's a completely different kind of model, and you can't really use them for the same thing. So it's something to keep in mind. Any other thoughts on fast models there? Adam, what's
I
on
know
your mind?
historically, like on Cerebres, like with Quincoder, they could only run 128K too. So my assumption is that this 128K is all encompassing. Like, that's what we have to work with. So I think, Ray, you were talking about this before, but like, there's got to be like background. To me, this would be almost an interesting model that would be available via an API for me to be able, because there's agents I have running that are doing particular things in some of the stuff that we're doing that I need the latency to be low, but I also need it to be of high quality. I would love to have a model like this to actually experiment with, because it's not like a crazy agent loop. There may be one or two tool calls. I really care about speed and quality of output there. And right now, like, what our best options are like GPT-5 Mini or the Gemini Flash models, things like that, or even Haiku. If this gets opened up to the API, like, I am going to test that out in those situations, because I have a very constrained context that I know I'm going to feed in, very limited tool calls, and ideally it should improve my end-to-end latency, from a user perspective when they're getting the results back.
Yeah. Well, it'll be exciting to see as this rolls out, see what we can do with it. I think right now the allocation of compute there is very limited, so they can't really roll it out too broadly. But, I think we'll see as time goes, where we end up with these fast models with specialized inference. It's an interesting space to explore. All right, so I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about what Anthropic's been claiming this week, that they've been attacked with, these different Chinese providers in terms of having their model distilled down into other models. And it's an interesting claim. So we haven't had a claim like this where they're specifically name calling these different providers. So there's like DeepSeek, Minimax, and sorry, I'm just blanking on the last one there. What was that one? Moonshot. That's it, right? So the Kimi models. So it's an interesting claim, and I if you follow Theo GG on X, who makes the T3 chat app, he was making a claim that actually they're lying about this. And it's interesting to see. So it's hard to take a lot of this at face value. We can't really, conclude, definitively without seeing all the data Anthropic has on this. But it has been a claim, we've kind of seen in the background that these model providers are having their models distilled, and you can see trying a lot of these Chinese models that they say they're Claude, and so it's very obvious that they're trained on a lot of traces from Claude. But I'm curious to know from you guys what you think in terms of what this means for the landscape. Like, especially as Claude is in some hot water right now with the U.S. government. There's a lot that's unresolved there. Like, I think it's becoming an interesting kind of escalating geopolitical situation, in this phase of AI, especially as these models get more capable. So I'm curious, Adam, you have any thoughts on what we're going on here?
Tons of thoughts on this. So let me. There's a range of emotions that I have to this. The first thing that I always jump to is this is the first time that I know of where we've actually had a claim that named companies that are actually doing this. So DeepSeek, 150,000 exchanges. That's actually minuscule in my mind. That's not going to actually move the needle for what DeepSeek's doing there. Moonshot, 3.4 million. That starts getting a little bit more impressive. Minimax, 13 million. But I also, on the other hand, this is a bold claim, and there's not really evidence provided in this blog post or any of the news that's been released. We could jump to the conclusion that the assessment that Anthropic did is correct, and if it is correct, it wouldn't surprise me, because I mean, we all kind of can tell you, like, models that we try, like, this feels like Claude, or it talks like Claude, or sometimes you can even trick it into saying it's Claude. Like, I've seen like Reddit posts of that. it wouldn't surprise me, but I also think like it's such a bold claim that I wonder what the motive behind like why this would be surfaced now, because how has to have been happening over the history of Anthropic. You know that this has to have been happening that long. So I think there's probably more behind the presentation of this than what we actually have information on. I do agree with Theo though, like some of the numbers. Who cares if DeepSeek's agent? Who cares if 150,000 requests were sent to Claude? Like that could have not even been training related. That could have been usage. We have no information on that. You start getting into the 13 million, that starts to feel a little bit more like some automated types of things being set up. So in my mind, I really would need more proof. I need to kind of understand, like, I would love to be able to get like a deep dive analysis of the data that they're actually extracting and potentially like the people or how they've actually tracked these accounts to the individuals. Because that's a bold statement to say they tracked it to an IP address of a researcher at a lab. Like how did you do that? How did you accomplish that? What kind of assumptions are you making along the way? So anyway,
Yeah.
I think it needs a lot more evidence for us to like totally jump aboard, in my opinion.
Well, I think they are probably reticent to release too much evidence because then they're kind of revealing their methods of tracking it, which makes them vulnerable again to being
I
attacked.
mean,
So,
I think that's
eh,
fair, but I also think the other angle of this is the U.S. companies are probably nervous about the stuff that's happening on the Chinese side. So it is an AI versus China versus U.S. kind of like AI war that's happening. It's good. Like we need that kind of competition, but we can't just like take this at face value because I
agreed. Yeah.
partially like who's to say Claude isn't also doing this for all other models that are out there? Like there's so much behind the scenes here that we just don't have information on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have very mixed emotions on it. On one hand, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. I would have totally done that too if I was building a model over there. Like it makes sense. But on the other hand, it's like, why is it coming out now? How did we not know this was happening? Are you sure you've tracked this to the individuals correctly? We've got 24,000 accounts. Aren't there like there's got to have been some flags or things known about before? Um, I don't know. I feel like there's probably different motives behind releasing this blog post or this news article than just revealing that these three named companies, not Quinn, like there's Quinn, Alibaba's not on there, which also surprised me. Z.AI surprised me that they're not on there.
Hmm.
It's fascinating.
It sure is.
I also want to
What's
pull apart that additional thing you said off the stream a little bit was more about like competition. If you can speak to that a little bit too on what this means.
Yeah. So my point here is that, and this kind of goes into the change, and we're kind of jumping into a future topic. So Anthropic has kind of softened their stance on the basically stopping AI development if the risk exceeds a certain threshold. So what I read that as is they have acknowledged that they are no longer the only horse in the race. Like they are not. If they were to stop, everything's going to continue forward. And I think you're right, Ray. There's probably some parallel with this and like acknowledging that these companies actually have something now that is competent. They have things that are good. And then did they actually pull data from Claude? I bet so. Like if I was a betting person, I bet they did. But also to go out and like name them and attack them without supporting evidence, like what's the outcome that they expect from this? Like what are they like what benefit does this have to bring up other than cast shade on these companies? Um, I don't know. Is there going to be a lawsuit? Probably not. Like this is across two different countries. I don't know. I'm very curious where this ends up going long term.
yeah.
Thing that I'm afraid of a little bit as like American citizen is that I really believe in free models and open weights, and that's kind of how this all stuff got started, right? And I feel like the naming of specific companies, I'm afraid of the like things are going to be in the sense like if you use these models, then you're technically involved in terrorist activity or something like that. It can go
Well, I
down a
wouldn't go
slippery
that far,
slope, right?
but I think they can sanction different models and really
Mm-hmm.
restrict usage, and that can be a huge issue. So, I mean, that is a risk, as we start getting into it, especially if, cloud models are like essential to the US government's operation, that like any attempts to use these like knockoff models are, a risk. The thing that does worry me a little bit with all of these open models is, we're getting to a point where models are, a lot more risky. They're able to do a lot more. We're seeing, all these, like there was a recent story this week where someone used Claude to break into the Mexican government. People are using them to break into their stove, into all these smart appliances. I saw another story where someone had a DJI drone, not drone, robot vacuum, and they accidentally broke into the network and were able to peer into the cameras of 6,000 different robot vacuums. So like using Claude, you're able to kind of do a lot now with in terms of security, risk, and you don't have to be that smart to get it to do it. So as these models get more capable, and they're using Claude, which is the most safety aligned one, what happens with models that don't have that rigorous safety testing, that are being kind of released on the world, that people are running, and they're more at risk of prompt injection, especially if you're running these locally. What happens to if an attacker comes to you and gets them to exfiltrate everything? Like we're getting to a strange time, and I think we're going to have to start being more careful with how we install and run these models on our machines, especially as they have full control of our machines. There's a lot going on here, and it's going to be an interesting thing to follow. And I think this is definitely not the end of this story here. You did touch on this, Adam, that the responsible scaling policy was rolled back with Anthropic, and I just want to kind of stress that a little bit more. So Anthropic, if you're not familiar, they previously are the ones that had the strongest stance on safety, and that they would pause if things got too far beyond a certain capability threshold, and they rolled that back now. And to Adam's point, like what he's saying is, now there's more competition and they can't kind of control the stopping. I think to their point, like, a lot of these stopping points have to be kind of industry-wide efforts of slowing down and stopping.
They do.
I do think, we are moving very fast now. And, I do think there's a little bit more of a reckless energy, as things get faster and faster. They're kind of cutting corners a little bit to kind of stay ahead and kind of draw attention and push on capabilities. I think it's kind of hard to tell everything that these models can do as we release them so quickly. Like, if there's a 2-month window between a model being trained and a release, like how can we say that they've kind of done the full gauntlet of testing and what that gauntlet of testing is? Because we don't really know. These labs are closed. We don't really know the full story there. So it's a strange time, interesting to kind of follow from the outside, a little bit worrying, to be honest. I don't want to be a doom-mongerer either, but I think that there's just like this kind of question is going to come up more frequently over the next year, I think, and it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. So I think let's like kind of switch gears a little bit again, and I think we've all been working on this as coders with these models, and there's just been a step change in the last few months of how much quality code you can get out of these models. A lot of folks are talking about it. We've heard, Michael Truel, who's the Cursor founder, who was talking about, how we're entering the third phase of development where 100% of code is written by AIs, and the way that we work with these models is changing. Andre Kaparthi was also mentioning this as well, how, like just 2 months ago, it was just a completely different experience in terms of the reliability of these models. So we're in a place now where increasingly, and if it hasn't hit your company yet, it's going to probably come at some point. We're getting to very large percentages of code being fully automated. So how do we deal with this? There's just so much code coming out, and as an engineer in a company, how do you manage all of this? How do you coordinate with all of this? So I'm curious. I know, Adam, you have a lot of thoughts on this. You're working in a big company at the moment, so tell us, what are you thinking about this?
Yeah, I've actually thought a ton about this because we have everything from like historic code bases to new things that have happened. And I came from a startup. In the startup world, you just go. There is less dependencies on other things, and you just go build the thing you need. But I go back to the company I was at prior to my startup. We were a fintech. This mental model that I had built in my head at that time, pre-AI, was that what was the most important part of our business is about 20% of the code that needs to never fail. Like this is like transactional data. This is data. This is part of the code base that if there is a problem, actually impacts all of our customers in a very bad negative way. But if a UI breaks, and there's one workflow broken, that's very minimal compared to like our core system, which needs to be protected. So what I've started to think about a little bit is just like there's a series of there's a good portion of your code which I think we can have like disposability as a core primitive for how we think about things when we design systems. If we can wrap and identify the most important things of our production systems, test around it. We make sure that the human is in the loop for a lot of that to make sure that that's not going to have a problem. Maybe even guardrails around what the AI can or can't change in those systems. And I'm making up that number 20%. That's just kind of the model I built in my head. So someone tell me it's 25, not going to argue with it. But there is a good portion of your code that honestly doesn't matter if it's not fully optimized. It honestly doesn't matter if one screen or something breaks for a little bit of time. Like there's a good portion of your code. Yeah, we want it to be good, but if it's not, let's throw it away and rewrite it. Like I think there's like a disposability principle that we can start building in, but keeping in mind that to do that, we have to have the clear boundaries between the important part of your code that can't break, and we have engineers and system architects have to understand what that is, so that we are protecting that with whatever it takes, unit test, integration test, contract testing, whatever needs to happen there to make sure that that doesn't fail. That's my thought. Curious what you guys think.
Well, I just want to just follow up a little bit on this disposability thing because I think, if you have a section of your code that you agree is probably more disposable than other parts, I think the problem is just keeping track of what that is, because the risk is as you move forward, as team members churn, you have that part that you said, oh, this is disposable, but other teams start building on it, and you start making that a kind of a bottleneck in terms of the stability of your code base, and it initially started that way, but it's no longer that anymore. Or even if it's not that, and you said, okay, maybe there's something that's going to break here. You have to keep track of the risks around what can break and what can't break. And it's easy as if you're writing out thousands of lines of code, if you start moving your attention elsewhere, you kind of forget that part of the code is riskier. So you have to really keep and juggle these balls in your head. So you have to watch out that maybe you should rewrite that, or maybe you should come back to it, spend a little time paying attention to it. So I'm
Yeah,
curious
I
what your
think
thoughts are there.
there's two ways to think about that because I agree with you. Um, I think a lot of companies really do over platformize things. That's not
Hmm.
a word, but you know what I mean? Like I think we
Of
try to
course.
like centralize things a bit too much. And I think in the age of AI, we have to reduce that. So building on top
Yeah.
of things, we need to be very cognizant of exactly what you said. If someone's building on top of something, again, that becomes like a core part of your system that then can't change. That would be
Hmm.
the way that I would try to do it. Now, it's easier said than done because to your point, like people are jumping around, we're working on different things get lost. The execution of this is going to be key, and I don't think anybody's going to do it perfect. But I do
Hmm.
think there's a level of like we should not be afraid to throw away code, and we should think about code that should be built on top of or is core to our system. But that code should be minimal. Like we need to make
Hmm.
that as minimal as possible because there's certain things that we've platformed. And I think back to my days at the fintech. Like there's a lot of things we platformed out today, which would make no sense to platform out because AI can just write that so much faster. We don't technically need some of that shared capability anymore. Certain things, yeah, like authentication, that for sure. Infrastructure, yeah, sure. Database access layers, definitely. But there are certain things that you for sure like. I would even anchor in like the UI layer as a whole. Probably there's a good portion of that has been platformed out in companies that I've been a part of that probably doesn't really need to be platformed out anymore, so that we can actually move faster in each of these verticals. Of course, people would argue other ways on that. That's the way my head goes. And then
Hmm.
the other side of that is it really depends on where you are. Like if you're in a big company and you're building a new product, like at that point, more of your code should be disposable than not because you don't even know if the product's going to work or not.
Hmm.
So you need to earn the right to get to the point to stabilize your product at that point. If you're taking care of like an old monolithic code base, we already know there's product market fit there. So your approach to that's very different. Your disposability principle needs to kind of adapt to the code base and where you are on like the product market fit side.
I just worry that, like, because I wonder if it is a lot more expensive to put a little bit of extra thought before generating the code to make sure that it's something that can be well tested and well isolated. Because I think there is a way now that AI models can write such, so much code, but they can also write good code if you kind of steer them that way. That we shouldn't think of code so much as disposable as like we should like even disposable code we should probably architect in a way that might be considered something to build on later. Like I don't think that we should just think of it as something to kind of throw away and never come back to. And I'm curious what you think there.
I mean, I think that's a very fair, and I agree with you. I think AI can write really good code. And I also think if you prompt it correctly and you understand how you want things laid out and architected and you guide it, you can get things really well done. But I also think there's a bit of uh, when we need to move fast, there's a level of like it's a linear scale. How much does that matter when you haven't found product market fit? It's like, do you spend the time making sure things are architected well in something that has a 50-50 shot to get thrown away? Or do you think about that as something that's disposable that you're trying to get customer learnings from to move faster? And I think it's going to depend on the team and the product. And like, if you find that you can go just as fast and have things stable and you're okay doing that extra work, knowing that there's a high likelihood that that code probably won't exist in its current state 6 months from now anyway because of whatever product changes that you're working through trying to figure out if it works or not, then I think it's like that's totally fine. But I do think the maybe the bigger point here is identifying the part of your code, the system as a whole, that needs to be highly protected. And like you need to have the boundary set around it. I think about things like transactional ledgers and things like that are just highly critical, performance that matters, things that are doing millions of transactions, a second, that just you cannot break that part of your system.
Mhm.
And to me, and it's like everything else, while important, it's probably less important to put those guardrails around it, would be maybe another way to think about that.
So I think there's a trade-off though where the more you kind of code with these models, and this is something I've been finding a lot. I've been using a lot of 5.3 lately. So the key issue is that these models don't read the complete picture. They can't fit it all in their context window. So they're always reading small subsets of files at one given moment in time. And the issue with that is that they don't end up knowing that maybe a helper exists or something else exists, or they don't see that there's a shared pattern between these different parts of your code. And then they end up recreating their own abstractions and their own tools and doing it and duplicating code. And you end up with like a lot of complexity that builds up very quickly if you're not paying attention. And it becomes a lot harder to then maintain that code and even build on it because the more you kind of go and you let this kind of fester, you just get all this growth of code,
Yep.
and if you want to move fast at a certain point, you're going to get slowed down by that cruft and all that complexity because then the models have to navigate it and it takes them longer to find the right part of code to edit, and then they're not able to keep as much in mind. So I think like this thing where you got to move fast, so don't care about the code, and yes, even if you do have this side of your code that is more protected, it's like it's just hard to avoid having complexity buildup that you have to maintain and manage because it's just uncontrollable. So I'm curious, like, does that affect your review at all, or like, because I'm sure you've observed it too.
Oh, 100%. So I actually love this conversation because
Mm-hmm.
I started to build this. We've all been there where a team is paralyzed in making a decision, so no code gets written. So then you end up with zero. And you've also been there where two teams are doing the same thing, so you end up with two copies of the same solution. What's better in that scenario? What's better in that scenario is two. Like it's better to actually have something, even though you've got duplicate work, than zero. So I kind of been trying to think about the same thing from an AI perspective. And I keep going back to try to put myself on a team where someone is dropped into a code base that they don't know that has maybe 20 million lines of code or it's been built up over many, many years. They are not going to have the context to even help the AI make a decision on what exists or not. And the AI is not going to be able to find it, to your point, because they are limited on their memory. So what's the best option there? Is the best option to try to build guardrails around let's protect the things that this person should not be able to test. And who cares if there's a duplicate, helper function if we're okay with over time throwing that away and rewriting it. So that's my I'm not saying it's an easy answer, but that's sort of where my head goes is like 2 is better than 0, but if we can get to 1 copy of it, that's the ideal state. But I'm also not afraid of duplicate code in this age of AI. No, especially for cases like I just talked about.
All right. And I'm curious, Ray, you've been a little quiet throughout this. Me and
Yeah.
Adam have been going back and forth. And I know it's been a while since you've been working on teams, but you had a lot of experience working on big teams at Apple. I'm curious,
Yeah.
how is your thinking around this changing with AI being able to generate code so quickly?
There are a couple different threads that I'm pulling on, and your guys' conversation kind of reminded me about like maybe Objective C runtime.
Mm-hmm.
And what if we actually start to formulate an AI runtime where
Mm-hmm.
like things are actually kind of simple, just objects and things. You really don't see these things until like they're actually running in runtime and the errors kind of really start to show up, right? And compilers can only do certain things, and like the code itself and all these checks that you do to scaffold these things that don't show up. But where the real bugs show up is in those integrations, right? Like you have some chip provider that gives you some things, and then you find out 80% of them are bad. So you have to now make this software workaround. So all the assumptions you made in code are correct,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual underlying layer and these, all the frequencies that come together. So it's like, those are the things that you pick up when you actually start using these things, especially as humans. And if AI can operate so fast and in its runtime fix itself, that layer of language is actually not something that humans can really review, but it just sets of like, hey, here's some basic rules and things, and then you can kind of do this. Do we have to see the code that happens? No. We just kind of have to guide these things. And a lot of times as engineers for humans, like, kind of on maybe the bigger thread here is like, is the code that's outputted just to appease humans? Like, are we writing code for other humans and we're reviewing it as other humans? And then are we expecting these AI things that create code for us to be appeasing us, right? Can they just do their own thing if we just give them a runtime and very minimal constraints and say, hey, go operate in this environment, and I trust that you can do the right things. And then those machines start talking to their own machines and invent their own language. Like, I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing this out there as a high
Yeah.
level topic because I feel like that's where, the cursor and these other folks are trying to say it's going. They're in essence, they're still involved in some ways because they're still giving the instructions to the machines. But as there's
Well,
is
so
there this
I want to just chime in on there because you just pulled on something interesting, which I think is very important to highlight. Is like, oh, I trust that it'll do the right thing, but what is the right thing? And like that's a big question, because as we prompt a model to do work, like that's a lot less precise than writing code, which is it's very specific and where you think through all the logic yourself. Um, it could be more precise with the spec. And a lot of tools are going towards a spec, but like a spec is not perfect. And a lot of times people are generating specs with AI and not reviewing all of the subtleties in there. And so then you're introducing more chaos and complexity that might not be worth doing. So I just think it's hard to be in a place where you're able to kind of unload a huge chunk of work onto the models and have them execute perfectly, because I don't think you as the developer knows exactly what that chunk of work actually should be, because you have an idea in your mind, but what you've conveyed to the models is not perfect. So I think until we get like something like Neuralink, where the models are like kind of really deep in your head and understand the subtleties of what you're thinking, I think there's just going to be this lossy translation where you were just not going to get to that perfect end state. I think it'll improve. Models will get better at understanding us. They'll understand our patterns more, and context windows improve. They'll get better at when Eric says this, that's what he means. But I think there's a fundamental limit there onto how far we can get. And I saw this interesting post this week. It was this Uncle Bob Martin, who's this somewhat controversial figure on X, who was talking about this, and he's saying that there's just no such thing as like a perfect spec, like formalization of a spec that you can convey, that is kind of provable to be correct from the model's perspective, because it's a lossy kind of representation. And when like that implementation hits the road and it's being tested out and run by the models, like you just don't know exactly what it is that was built and whether that perfectly represents what the spec said, because there's not just like a perfect one-to-one linking there. So we're in this messy phase where we're trying to get to this higher abstraction layer, but we don't have the tools to kind of make it there. And it's interesting to see us try and get around that. Sorry, I interrupted you, Ray, to go on this rant there, but I'm curious, anything in there resonating with you?
No, I think I don't know. I'm trying to think about where things are going to be going because in the last couple of years, a lot of the stuff that is advanced in AI has really been focused towards us as people who are writing software. But I really don't feel like a lot of the pre-training efforts have gone up in the same exponentials, right? I think a lot of optimizations and low-hanging fruit have been on the software end. And I'm also curious, like, if from a business perspective too, if I was like Gen Z starting a business in 2026, you almost have to just use AI coding all the time just to keep up with things, right? There's this weird conundrum of like speed and iteration and trying to get something to market. And you can't just be this like, oh, like I've already worked in Fang and I made a bunch of money. So I'm just going to write all my whole code by hand and just be artisanal and just chill at the beach and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know. Like where does everyone sit with this? Is my question, right? Like, are we building two different worlds here? And then, access to these models and tokens and costs and output. That's kind of my bigger picture
Yeah,
here.
I would kind of add on to what both of you were saying before, and I think we should probably talk about like there's a difference between startup mentality and then corporate mentality or stabilized, product development. The other problem that I run into, and this may sound a little bit counter to what I was saying before about, the 20% and then kind of having the other stuff be a bit more disposable. But one of the biggest pain points right now is code reviews with all this code that gets generated. I can generate a ton of code. Like, and I'd be like, oh, it's working. Hand it over to like a teammate and be like, go review this. They're gonna shoot me. So like, there is that's why I don't know if spec-driven development. And I liked what you brought up. I haven't read that from what Bob
Uncle
said,
Bob. Yeah.
Uncle Bob, because I almost wonder like, is that even beneficial? Because that's going to generate massive commits. And like anytime you have a massive commit, especially into a stable code base, that's huge risk. The smaller the commit, you want smaller commits, higher velocity. And AI isn't really conducive to that, or at least there's not workflows that I've seen that are conducive to that today. So it's like how do we also go from protecting the code needs to be protected, but also moving faster, but in small commits, high volume fashion. So it's much easier to lower like the defect rate or the things that could go wrong. And then on the business side, the way I'd put that, Ray, is like you're right. If you're a startup today, you're 100% using AI code and you're moving as fast as you can. You haven't earned the right, in my opinion, to focus on stabilizing your code base. You're trying to find product market fit. You're trying to get your first customer. You're trying to like get to that first $1,000, 10,000, $1 million in sales. But there is a point where you come over that hump and then you have to get into stabilization mode because your customers are going to expect you to not be changing things daily, not breaking things. There is a point where you have to stabilize and then your focus has to change from like volume and fast speed testing to, okay, how do I do this without impacting everyone? How do I make sure my code isn't, when I deploy, nothing's going to break for my customers that are paying me. So anyway, Eric, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap this discussion up a little bit. We're in this place where it's very tempting to move fast. You kind of have to if you're a startup. If you're a big company, the pressure's on you to kind of be more productive. But then, yeah, like the burden of review is huge. The methods of getting all of this code done correctly are still being figured out. It's a very new, uncharted territory. A lot of it's non-deterministic. A lot of programmers have been used to a world where things are deterministic, compilers are deterministic, but programs are not. So calling it an abstraction layer is not quite the right thing to say. So it takes a lot of skill to ride these models, and we have to like develop that skill and that bullshit detection. And the tricky thing is the models change so quickly, and the harnesses and the tools underneath them are changing so quickly that that skill needs to kind of constantly evolve, and it's a tiring time. So it's very exhausting to keep up with. So I think there's a lot to look into, there's a lot to look forward to. I think this will be an ongoing conversation on the pod as we kind of evolve here. And I want to kind of end this on a little note here on this idea that like AI is replacing all work. Just because, as we've said, there's a lot of work to do around how to determine what code should be written, what code should you make sure is solid, and which code should be disposable. That's a lot of thinking. That's a lot of work that models can't do yet, and they don't have the context to do yet. So there's a lot of work for engineers to do, and the data has shown recently. There's jobs data coming out in the U.S. showing that software engineers are in higher demand than ever, which is a little bit of something that I think people weren't predicting. We'll see if that lasts, but for now, there's just a lot to do, and I think as the ability for developers to turn out more code, or the cost of turning out code has gone down, there's just a lot more to do that just wasn't possible to do, and teams can tackle challenges that they weren't previously equipped to with the budget they had to do. Like, I'm sure you all have experienced, working on an old code base where you wanted to rewrite it because it's getting unmaintainable, but you just don't have the budget to do so. And maybe now it is possible to do. So it's an interesting time to try new things and explore. I'm curious, do you have any thoughts there, Ray, on this AI replacement thing?
I think it's going to be a little bit of a ways. I don't know. I think I look back a little bit in terms of like evolution of things, and I think we're kind of in our own little bubble with AI coding, because a lot of the stuff a lot of the changes that are coming in are really just post model training. We haven't gone GPT 3.5 to like GPT. I think a lot of people were saying that GPT 5 was really supposed to be the AGI model, and it felt like most of the stuff was like this post, reasoning, traces and post training stuff. And then now people are like basically putting their agent harnesses on steroids, right? So these teams have had a longer time to build those tools out, and the models aren't making those decisions like they said they would. And so how many more jobs can actually really be replaced? And with OpenClaw, the way that we're using it, it's just like a unhinged agent. It's kind of giving me that little preview of like, well, like I'm spending more time updating my OpenClaw than I actually am getting productivity from it, right?
Yeah.
Nothing is solved. It's capable and I have to steer it, but it's not like I can just hand this skill off to another person and they can just take it from there. And like companies like Notion are trying to do that. So I think I think there are a lot of low hanging fruit in these companies. I think they should definitely explore them. I think, finance bros, everyone who's like doing data analysis and crunching, you no longer need that intern who's just good at Python. You just, Opus fast it, and like it's going to be really good at, pulling together a graph. Then you can just now do that presentation or something that you can, for clients at scale. And so, yeah, I don't, to replace jobs, I think, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily going to be like an all end all, like one click button. But and maybe my ending thesis here is that like I really don't like this fear framing per se, and the fear framing of like starting off first, like this is going to replace jobs, therefore, hey, our solution and we're the ones who should be in charge type of thing is like, or listen to us because we're the ones who are knowledgeable. Framing is also it makes me just kind of put my alarms up and say, look, we as people have actually control of this too, right? Like this is our data that was used to train these things, and they're, everyone's benefiting from this, and we also have a say in it somehow. I don't know, like I feel like I have like a, yeah, I don't know how to end this, but yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm thinking is like, is it going to replace engineers? Probably not. There's a lot of low hanging fruit. You should be using these systems, play with them, prompt with them. You'll learn a lot doing that in the process. And just because you're getting started out now doesn't mean you're very far behind.
Yeah,
I think I just want to add just one point, and then we'll get to you, Adam. I just wanted to say that, while we're not replacing engineers, I think we are changing the job. And I think it's kind of impossible to avoid that the work is different. The way we do work is different. I think there's still areas where the models haven't kind of fully evolved to meet things. Like there's a lot of languages and certain things where the training on these models hasn't just gotten to the point where like even the best programmers are not, able to do that work better. But we're getting there. And I think for the full job scope, it is around this RL, to Ray's point, where like we are reinforcing the models on certain kinds of skills. And I think that buildup is like the labs will try and kind of do the work of every white collar worker on a computer. They will make that effort. So anyway, I just had to throw that in there. Adam, what are your thoughts there? I wanted to hear from you on this.
My closing thoughts are like, if you're getting into engineering now, it's like, in my opinion, the best time to get into engineering. I just could not imagine being a college student right now and like all the things that you can build, even if you don't have a big budget and you're just using Claude.ai $20 a month plan in the web. Like that alone unlocks so much for you that I would have killed for at that age. Like I remember like spending hours and like days like building stuff that I could like explore and experiment with, in minutes now. But you're right, the job has changed. It's no longer about writing the code, it's about designing the systems, and it's about solving a problem and getting people to use it. So you need to find joy in that part of it rather than actually grinding out the code. So and debugging and problem solving, that kind of stuff is I don't see that changing in our lifetime personally. I don't see AI replacing engineers in our lifetime personally. And the canary that I would say is we should watch the labs like OpenAI and Anthropic. The second they start cutting engineers or they stop hiring engineers or they say we have no engineers, that's when it's going to be like, okay, that'll trickle down to other people. They're the canary that we can watch.
Yeah,
They're hiring. They're
a
hiring
lot.
at pretty high salaries right now.
Yeah. So it's interesting time. I think there's a lot to pay attention to. I do think that like folks who are very technical, who are able to steer these models, are in a position to benefit from them. But if you're very non-technical and you're just kind of doing something repetitive, that is something that the AI will probably be able to do. So it's important to kind of understand that distinction too. And the labs are coming for that work, with a lot of, they want to make that bank, they want to make the money. So we'll see where things go. Lots to kind of look forward to. It's a strange time though, and lots changing very quickly. So I think it'll be important to tune in and keep up to date with us, and let us know what you think of this discussion today. I think it was a little bit of a different speed. I think from like all the releases we've had to cover. I think it's been a little slower for now, and I want to hear what you all are thinking about this, and how do you feel it's impacting your job, and where you think things are going from here. So yeah, want to hear from you. Any closing thoughts there, Adam?
No, yeah, I just say I appreciate everyone. I actually am super bullish about everything. It's always, even though to me
Mm-hmm.
that I'm starting to like, how do we solve the problems around being productive in this age of AI? Like to me, that is going to be an exciting, probably 5 year
Mm-hmm.
journey to figure out what this means.
Of course.
Overall, though, I am really looking forward to the next like actual good Google model. So like there's models on the horizon like DeepSeek that I'm keeping an eye out. I think I would love to see like a new Flash version, which that's got to be coming. And then ChatGPT, I'm they're kind of exciting too. It'll be interesting to see what GPT-6 is, where that's in. Is the velocity of this going to increase, or are we going to be 18 months before we get 6? So all of that's going to be fun to watch over the next
Yeah.
few months here.
Yeah. How about you, Ray? Any closing thoughts?
I just want to thank everyone again for participating and following us along this journey. It's just been incredible for us to hang out here. And I think we started this show just to have another place for us to kind of dump our thoughts in. Because if it does feel like it's moving fast, it does, you're probably not alone. And I think there are a lot of varying perspectives, and we appreciate everyone who's taking the time to really just kind of share their stuff in the comments. It's super amazing to engage with you. And I think we'll try to get some more stuff coming soon. This is probably growing faster than we initially thought. Having over 2,000 plus subscribers on YouTube has just been incredible, and we're trying to aim for that. The number one AI podcast, spot. So if you're actually interested in doing that, all you have to do is just leave a 5-star review on Spotify. It does help the algorithm push it up in Apple Podcasts and the places that you listen. And drop any comments. I think it's just really great. And we'd love to see that, at the end of the year or something. Would be kind of fun to have like a little thing going on. And I think this is really real. We should get together like other people in your communities and things and start reaching out. I think if this stuff moves really as fast as they say they do, and things get displaced, your agency is going to be how well you work with other people. What kind of problems you solve, how you engage to use this technology for good things in your areas. So hopefully this inspires you to do something great.
Yeah, I hope so. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Later, everybody. See ya.